And it looks like we're all here.
So if I may, just a greeting and a welcome to you all to our 48th annual meeting of the Connecticut Youth Services Association. It's an interesting opportunity to be in this place and to share this space with you all. I'm Justin Carbonella, the Youth Services Director from the City of Middletown, and also the President of the CYSA board. I think back to last year and where I might have been at this moment, and know that I woke up and I was worried about parking. I was worried about who would talk to me prior to my introduction and my last minute attempt to write something, and the logistics of a day filled with a room with hundreds of you all. That is not the case now. That is not 2020 in any stretch of our imagination. And I just want to take a moment to recognize how difficult this year has been, and that this is this has been a year, at least personally for me, full of tears, both happy ones and really sad ones. And I have cried cleaning my groceries out of pure exhaustion. I've also cried welcoming my daughter to the world. And so life continues, life goes on. And it goes on well because of you all. And so I can't thank you all enough for your presence in our state, for your presence in our communities, for the work that you're doing, for the space that you are holding, for each other, for your families, and for the youth and families that we serve. It's no small task. And I really want to thank you all for that. But by virtue of the fact that we are here, we've made it this far. It also means that we will make it through this. And we have communities to return to. And in that, we have work to do. And so I am proud of the vision that this event this morning is looking to share. One of a concerted and a diligent effort to be an anti-racist organization. This is not work that we can do through happy accidents. This is not work that we can do with marginal effort. This is work that is generational and critical and requires deliberate design, thinking, action, and planning. And so I appreciate you all spending some time with us this morning, starting to build out the infrastructure for this vision. Again, one that will take many years, one that we share with individuals and organizations throughout this country and throughout the state, and one that won't be without mistakes, both at the organizational and individual level. But collectively, we have an obligation to really look at systems of oppression, anti-Blackness, and how bias infiltrates all the things that we do as YSDs. We control enough of a system that we have work to do. And I'm appreciative of everybody's collective presence here today to start that work jointly. We have a long day, or a long morning, and so I will keep my remarks brief to that. But I do, above all else, just want to thank folks for their presence here today and the work that will follow after this morning. With that said, I also want to welcome Stephen Smith from the Department of Children and Families to give a greeting as well. This again, Stephen has been thrust into, at least when thinking back to last year, the responsibility and the role of helping to transition YSBs back under the Department of Children and Families. And I just want to thank Stephen for his communication and his partnership across the length of this year, particularly as YSBs had to adjust to serving families and communities through a pandemic. And I really appreciate your flexibility and your partnership as we all made adjustments to do the work that we need to do. So, Stephen, please.
Thank you, Justin, and good morning to all of you. I'd like to thank the CYSA board and organization as well. One, for this opportunity, and two, just for the real partnership. So, as Justin said, I mean, thrust into it. It was, a fairly quick transition last summer, but 15 months ago or so. CYSA was instrumental in helping DCF get up to speed, turn around applications, and keep the funding going to youth service bureaus. So we, to this day, see our relationship with CYSA and with the Youth Service Bureau system as a partnership. We understand the complexities of, or getting a daily renewed understanding of the complexities of the system across the state. And I say system, it's really the youth service bureaus are a fabric of and a result of each of their local communities. And I think CYSA does a lot to bring that together as a system. So again, thank you. Certainly, youth service bureaus coming back under DCF, although it seems like it was forever ago. It was just July of 2019, after a 19 or so year hiatus of being away from DCF. But the missions of DCF and the youth service bureaus is really, essentially very much aligned around strengthening families and helping to prevent families from requiring more intensive interventions at perhaps a state level in health, wellness, and then specifically around diversion of juvenile justice youth from system involvement. So 2020 has it's been a quick learning process, and it's also been a stalled learning process in many ways. But if nothing else, it's really highlighted the fact that so many families are really kind of on maintaining a tenuous balance, whether it's financially, whether it's managing just the challenges of parenting, of addressing mental health and substance abuse and other things that impact families, and all of these have been particularly challenged this year, and disproportionately so. And I think the CYSA's platform on becoming an anti-racist organization also aligns nicely with DCF's movement from a racially just goal to an anti-racism goal. So I think there's opportunity there as well. But I really got to see, just to Justin's point of the partnership that they saw, and I feel like all of the meetings I've attended, and and started off the year with attending some of your district meetings, and I felt like I was coming in with more like questions and more observations, and learning from all of you rather than having a lot of direction, because it really is a system that needs to be built and nurtured. But I really got to see the creativity and the passion as we responded to COVID-19. The responses of the YSBs in providing school supports, doing pizza and movie nights. Those are uplifting community events, but also just providing food, providing PPE to families, and we're able to give that flexibility. I would say it was an all hands on deck response in the early months, and it still is. But certainly, to Justin's point about washing your groceries and and really like not knowing if you could touch things. I can't imagine the calls that some of the YSBs were getting from their community, but I know the calls that I got, and I had an opportunity to meet and talk with a number of you face to face early on, and then certainly by phone. It really has been inspirational. 2021 holds, I think, opportunity both of that nature, but I think also of a more positive nature. We're resuming, Department of Children and Families resuming the Family First Prevention Services Act work. I know some of the folks in the Youth Service Bureau world have been involved in various work groups. There's a lot of work going on in the JJPOC and with the Improving Outcomes for Youth Task Force, specifically around diversion, that have both implications on and offer opportunity to the Youth Service Bureau system. So I think there is a lot of movement to be had in a positive sense. So I of course have to say that we've also made some moves around and creating a new budget. There's been lots of discussion around our end of the year fiscal and program reporting. I, as the program lead, work closely with our fiscal lead. So your responsiveness, your questions, your feedback have been hugely helpful, and we appreciate the budgets. And we're trying to kind of figure this as to keep the wheels moving as well. We're still very much committed to creating a data management system that is much more user friendly. Department of Children and Families is in the process of replacing their entire case management system. So that's a huge undertaking, and and they may present opportunities for both contracting side of things and the data side of things to see assess really how we're doing at improving outcomes for youth and families. So with that, again, I appreciate all of your efforts around the budget. Please keep any of those questions coming. I know we're still dialing in. Some budgets are awaiting final approval or resubmission. So again, thank you, and I look forward to today.
Thank you, Stephen. As folks know, CYSA is essentially a volunteer organization run by a volunteer board, and to that end, I want to make sure that I give proper praise and due to the professional development team that mobilized themselves to find a way to hold this annual conference virtually, meeting weekly to determine the vision and making sure that all of the logistics of that were accounted for. So thank you to each and every member of that professional development team. I don't know how you did it. I've said that to you before. I'm impressed in traditional years. I'm even more impressed by your efforts this year. To that, I'd also just like to thank SERC and Greg for their efforts in kind of running the behind the scenes logistics for us technically. So thank you so much. As we are a volunteer organization, we do have 2 contracts that mean the world to us. One who will speak to you briefly, Jay Aronson. The other, I just want to make sure I recognize Erica Bromley for all the work that she does for this organization and for our collective YSB network at the state level, and the advocacy that goes into trying to reimagine much of these systems, advocate for funding, while also advocating for change and better outcomes for young people. So Erica, I know you're with us out there somewhere on the internets. So thank you for your presence and for your effort. Additionally, I just want to thank Jay Aronson for all the work he does lobbying for us at the Capitol. I know in this new universe that we're in, Jay wants nothing more than to be up in Hartford right now, and he can't be because I think he has a real passion to advocate on our behalf. The work he does continues to impress me. His communication is always top notch. His advocacy is even of a higher level, and again, just appreciative of the work Jay does. And so Jay, if you want to also kind of give a greeting and an update.
Justin, thanks very much. Very kind words, and I truly appreciate it. Good morning, all you wonderful people. I wish, like Justin, we were all together doing this in a grand ballroom somewhere. But welcome to the executive offices and suites of the Aronson home. I want to thank the board for believing in me and my abilities to represent you all of you at the Capitol. I have not stopped doing that at all just because we have not been in the Capitol or in session. It has been a long, strange road since March 11th when the legislature shut down and never returned. And so I'm looking forward to what comes next in terms of a legislative session. It will be different. Obviously, with the COVID numbers going up, there is very little doubt that we will not be allowed back in the building. We as lobbyists we believe it or not, we have a lobbyist association. We have been talking for months about what to do and how to act, and we will continue to do that. We have sent a letter to leadership with some suggestions and asking for a meeting with them so that we can do your business for you, even virtually. So let's talk a couple of things. Obviously, with the election, there were some changes. Currently, the elections results stand as this. There will be a greater number of Democrats in the House and Senate. The Democrats right now will hold a 97-53 majority. If you add that up, that's only 150. We have 151 in the House. That is because one seat in Wallingford is going to be recounted. On election night, it was determined that it was actually called for the Democrat beating the incumbent. However, there apparently was a mistake in communications from a school in Wallingford. And so now that has gone to a recount where the incumbent, Representative Fishbein, actually won by a whopping 21 votes. So that is going to an automatic recount. So that is not determined yet. In the House, in the Senate, we go from 22-14 to 24-12. That gives the Democrats in the Senate a veto-proof majority. However, because the House is under 101, there is no veto-proof majority in the House. We have already started seeing Speaker Designate Ritter naming his chairs, and approps for the House will remain the same. Tony Walker will remain as House Chairwoman. Not that we do any business at all in the Finance Committee, but with Representative Rojas of East Hartford moving up to be the new Majority Leader Designate, Sean Scanlon from, I believe, the Guilford area will be moving up from the Insurance Chairmanship to the Finance Committee Chairmanship. And just yesterday, Steve Staffstrom from Bridgeport was told that he would remain as the Judiciary Chair. It is my understanding that Speaker Designate Ritter will continue to roll out daily his chairs so that they can get busy earlier because of COVID. Once certain chairs are named, we will start asking for meetings after our advocacy committee meets. If any of you out there in in our virtual world today would like to volunteer to be on the advocacy committee, please let Justin or Barbara Lockhart know. She is the chair of the advocacy committee. Which brings us to budget. Obviously with COVID, prior to COVID, things were looking great. The budget was balanced. We were looking at surpluses. When COVID hit and the stock market tanked back in March and April, there was great concern over how that would affect the budget. And you initially saw doomsday numbers coming out. Thankfully, the stock market, which Connecticut's budget really does rely on, has bounced back. And we actually ended last year's budget on June 30th with a slight surplus. This current budget deficit, this current year's deficit now stands at about 930 million. That has continuously come down. It was as high as 2 billion. It has come down. Again, it's about 960 million. That deficit will be covered by the rainy day fund. The governor has been pretty adamant about not raising taxes if at all possible. He will have to come up against a much more robust and liberal House and Senate now on how to create budget. But at this point, the rainy day fund has approximately $3.1 billion in it. So taking that about 960 out to cover this year's deficit is very possible. And there's still left over about 2.3 million after that, 2.2 million to help cover the out year deficits. So the budget starting in February that the governor is going to give will be the budget that is of concern with current budget deficits around 1.3, 1.5 billion dollars in deficit. Again, there is money to cover some of that, not enough. We will have to see what happens there. I'm counting on Steve and his crew at DCF to stand up for youth service bureaus, as I know he does and will, and fight for our funding in the governor's budget. And once that budget is proposed in February, the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee will take over and start dissecting it. We will be part of that, whether it's virtual or some other measure, but we will absolutely be part of those discussions. What can you do? I say this to you all the time. What can you do, especially those of you with new members in the legislature? So there are quite a few in the House, and like I said, 2 in the Senate. If you don't know who your legislators are, please let me know, and I'm happy to help you with that. But reach out to them. Obviously, you may not be able to bring them into your offices or your centers right now, but you can do, just like we're doing right now, a virtual meeting, okay? We usually do, at the beginning of each election session cycle, breakfasts with legislators. Sometimes it's done regionally, which is great. That may not be possible this year. That does not mean you cannot do it virtually. And I strongly, I can't tell you how important, more than any other time, it is vitally important for you all to be reaching out to your legislators and telling them who you are, what you do. Attach yourselves to me so that they know that I am your voice at the Capitol. So please, I beg you, reach out to your legislators, both your representative and your senator. Talk to them. Tell them about you, what you do, how you do it, how you spend the bang for the buck because of our shoestring budget, and what we do with that, and how we are able to use our shoestring budget by leveraging other monies. So please reach out to all these people. Again, contact me and let me know if you need help. I'm happy to help. A couple more things. Justin just mentioned, I too wanted to mention all the great work that Erica Bromley is doing for us. And I do say us because I feel, even though I don't do your work, I do feel very invested with you. And so does she. And she's done, yeoman's work on the juvenile justice front, working with DCF and especially on JJPOC, representing YSBs. And it's really showing in results. I want to throw out a name, somebody we a huge supporter who we actually honored last year, Noreen Kokaruda. Noreen was defeated. She was a multi-term incumbent Republican legislator from Madison who, without fail, every single time I saw her, Jay, we're working on doing stuff for those YSBs. We're doing stuff on the budget for the YSBs. Keep working with me. She was a huge supporter of youth service bureaus and, or as she liked to say, youth service boards. And we did honor her last year. And I just want to publicly thank her. I know she's not part of this today, but I do want to publicly thank her for all of her support over the years. It was very meaningful, and I will miss working with her. Finally, I just want to leave you with this. Again, I thank you very much for allowing me to represent you at the Capitol and before the administration. And I will end with this. Thank you very much, and don't stop believing in American democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And as you often like to remind us, we are your longest client. And I appreciate those years of advocacy and support. As we get into the business portion of the meeting, the annual meeting, and then transition to the presentation side, I just want to go over a couple things that may help us get through this morning well. We've all learned how to handle Zooms effectively, but I just to add to what we already know, please know, treat yourself well. You do not have to be on camera. Feel free to turn your cameras off. I can't see many of you. I can only see 3 of you right now. But no, and we advocate this as we do programming with young people too. Don't force them to have their cameras on. People can participate off camera, and that extends to you. So feel free to either join us on or off camera, whatever your preference is. Everyone is muted to help make sure that the audio is clear and accessible to everyone. That said, the chat function is available to you all to ask your questions, and particularly in the 2 presentations that we have. If you have questions, we will do our best to monitor the chat and allow for some question and answer at the end of each of those. Take care of yourselves. Just like in a regular conference, please feel free to stretch, get up, use the restrooms as needed. Self-care is always important, but I think in the middle of a pandemic and the existential crises that we face, take care of yourselves. Also, adjust your view if you need to. The big grid might be hard to follow everybody. So on your top right-hand corner, there is the view button, and you can adjust your view as needed. And also feel free to use the reaction buttons as needed. So, it's hard sometimes to talk without the feedback of people's body language and or claps and laughter. But those reaction buttons are available for you all on the bottom of your screen, and can help convey feedback to folks as they are going through their presentations. And I know it often means a lot to me in trainings and workshops and meetings to see those. So please feel free to root on and encourage folks as they talk. I know it's appreciated. That said, I want to introduce Cephas Nolan, CYSA's membership chair, to conduct the annual meeting portion of our event today.
Good morning, everybody. I think the first thing that we're going to do are the awards and then the actual business meeting. But as I can tell you, this has been one of the most difficult years in memory. But youth service bureaus across the state have really worked hard and continue to do its work in really new and creative ways. And today we really wanted to honor a few special people who, pandemic or not, did some great work for their communities this year. So our first award is for the Connecticut Youth Services Association Youth Leadership Award for 2020, which goes to Bianca Aries from Clinton, Connecticut. And what we will have is an introduction by Kelly Edwards of Clinton Youth Services, and then that will be followed by an acceptance by Bianca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Edwards, and I'm the prevention coordinator for the town of Clinton. And I'm here to introduce you to one of my favorite young people who I nominated for the Youth Award this year. Her name's Bianca Arias. She's a senior at the Morgan School this year. She started working with me and doing stuff with our drug-free youth group and our coalition when she was a freshman. As a freshman, she jumped right in. She decided she wanted to be the freshman president because we have officers for every class. And as the freshman president, she contributed to substance abuse campaigns, mental health campaigns, suicide prevention. She mentored our middle school kids in their REACT groups. She spoke with our parents and talked to them about ways to discuss hard topics with their children. And also she assisted in planning the Shoreline Prevention Conference, or Shoreline Girls United Conference. And that included attending many planning meetings and facilitating her own workshop for younger girls. As a sophomore, Bianca got even more involved, and her leadership during sophomore year got her invited to attend Youth to Youth in Rhode Island, as well as CADCA in Washington, D.C. It was really exciting when we went to Washington to watch Bianca and a couple of her peers talk eloquently, respectfully, and in such a poised manner with our U.S. senators, representatives, and their aides about things like vaping and mental health in town. I was really impressed with Bianca, and that's when I knew her leadership was going to take her to a lot of places. She assisted with putting together our Got Outcomes nomination for CADCA, and that actually ended up helping us become a finalist for that award. As a junior, Bianca increased her influence up to the state level. She got involved with the Governor's Prevention Partnership as a youth council advisor, and she became a peer assistant for us here in town, which is a part-time paid position to do group development with our middle school kids. She put together billboards and poster content, billboards and bulletin board content. She created a presentation where she presented our survey data to our new town council and our new town manager. She also coordinated a kickball tournament, but unfortunately that was canceled by COVID. Bianca was planning to go to Youth and apply as a youth staff member. However, again, COVID took that. Now, as a senior, Bianca is our overall REACT president. She's continuing on as a youth peer assistant. She's continuing her work with the Governor's Prevention Partnership. She's also a peer advocate at Morgan. She is on the varsity track and softball teams. And I just can't say enough about all her contributions to prevention, to wellness, to being an amazing role model. We're so proud of her. And I hope that you agree that she is just, all we could ever hope that for youth involvement. Congratulations, Bianca. Thank you to CYSA. Thank you to David Malillo here in Clinton. And, Bianca, keep it up. I look forward to the rest of the year with you. Congratulations.
Hi, I'm Bianca Arias from Clinton. I wanted to take a quick second to say a huge thank you to Kelly Edwards, not only for her kind words, but for nominating me for this award and being an incredible mentor these last 3 years. So receiving this award has brought back some memories from around the age of 8. My grandmother used to work for Madison Youth and Family Services, and she was the one who kind of introduced me to giving back to my community. For Easter, we would give away Easter baskets. Thanksgiving, we would do some meals for Thanksgiving dinner, and then Christmas, we'd give away Christmas trees to families in need. This just kind of felt like some fun family bonding. We'd hang out and spend the day together doing this stuff. But over the years, I discovered that I have a passion for this work. By my freshman year, I knew that I had to become a part of REACT. This is where I first met Kelly on a professional level. I'm so grateful she gave me the opportunity to work alongside her and meet some incredible people and do some amazing things. The joy that I receive from knowing that I've made a difference in my community will carry me to continue this work in some form for as long as I'm able to. Thank you.
So congratulations to Bianca for that. And our second award is for the Connecticut Youth Services Association Employee of the Year Award for 2020, which will be awarded to Stephen Bynum of Bristol, with an introduction by Joshua Medeiros of Bristol's Park and Rec Youth and Community Services.
Hello, Connecticut Youth Services Association professionals. My name is Dr. Joshua Medeiros, and I have the privilege of serving the City of Bristol as a Superintendent of Parks, Recreation, Youth, and Community Services. Our department's Youth Services Bureau is a staple of the Bristol community. As everyone knows, you can't offer great programs and services without a team of dedicated youth professionals to develop, coordinate, and lead. Here in Bristol, we have a phenomenal youth services team that work around the clock to meet the needs of Bristol's young people. The team is led by Supervisor Stephen Bynum, who was promoted to the role of supervisor a year ago this month, after over 13 years of service to the city. As we have all learned with the COVID-19 pandemic, being adaptable, flexible, and leaning into change is essential to our survival as professionals in this industry. Stephen Bynum was an exemplary example of someone that was able to accomplish that and so much more over this past year. Not only did he work closely with his staff to pivot to virtual programs and counseling services, he was also instrumental in facilitating the integration of the Bristol Parent and Child Center into our Youth and Community Services Division, a massive program that provides services for at-risk parents that need assistance with parenting classes, access to supplies through our caring closet, and even in-home visits from our professional staff. On top of everything else, Stephen played a critical role to ensure the success of this integration. He was successful because he always brings a positive can-do attitude to every situation and seeks solutions to every problem. It's for these reasons I'm so proud to introduce to you the 2020 Employee of the Year, Stephen Bynum.
I am so honored to be here today to accept the Connecticut Youth Services Association Employee of the Year Award. I would like to thank Dr. Joshua Medeiros for his nomination and the Connecticut Youth Services Association for my selection. Working in this field for the last 14 years has given me the opportunity to learn so much from my colleagues, families, and youth that we serve. I am excited to continue this journey and offer a warm thank you to all the youth service bureaus doing this very special work. My transition from outreach support worker to supervisor has opened my eyes to another level of human services. In this field, I have learned that understanding, patience, and quick thinking are essential tools to have. Our division staff have stepped up services during a very critical time and have smoothly transitioned programs to virtual platforms. I thank them for their dedication and determination. With all this being said, it is with great appreciation that I accept the 2020 Employee of the Year Award. Thank you.
Well, congratulations and thank you, Bianca and Stephen, for all the work that you guys have done over this past year. So thank you. Now we're getting to everybody's favorite part of the meeting, the business portion. So the business portion of the CYSA annual meeting, the nomination committee of Connecticut Youth Services Association is pleased to present the membership with the following proposed slate of officers and an open at-large position for 2020, ending in 2022. And also nominations are from the floor will be accepted during today's meeting. So as you can see, for President, Justin Carbonella, for Vice President, Scott Cochran of Madison Youth Services, Kristen Mabrock from Naugatuck Youth Services, past President Michelle Picarello from Cheshire, and our open at large position would be Lori Stanzik from Rocky Hill Youth Services. So there will be an opportunity to vote. And remember, only the directors can vote. And that will end our meeting for 2020.
Great. Thank you, CYSA. I'm appreciative of you all for the second term. It is an honor to serve in this capacity. I know I owe CYSA so much for my growth and development over 15 years in this job. I hope I can, at least in some small portion, offer some of those gifts back to you all. I also want to thank Michelle Picarello, who's been so gracious in both extending her time initially as president to give me an extra year as my son was born 4 years ago. And added an extra term of president to make sure I can kind of get my feet under me as a new dad, and for her to be past president now for a second term. So I'm appreciative of Michelle as well as the rest of the exec team for the work that they all do. As we kind of introduce the presentation portion of the annual meeting, I think it's important to recognize where I am speaking to you from. Our YSB recently has relocated into a former school in downtown Middletown with the hope and the dream and the vision to turn this space into a restorative justice center. One of the first purpose-built restorative justice centers in the country. And I think that's emblematic of the shift that our state and our communities are beginning to take. To reimagine, to re-envision what a better world could look like, what a more just world could look like. And taking hard and critical looks at the systems we belong to, that we perpetuate, how they contribute to the detriment of some folks, particularly our Black and Brown community members. And that work is happening here in Middletown. I know it's happening across the state of Connecticut. And now that work will happen at the Connecticut Youth Services Association level. And so a lot of this conversation was kicked off from a statement that this body, that this group made back in June. I want to specifically thank Antonia Thompson for her efforts to reach out initially and prompt this group to make such a statement. I think it came at a really critical time personally for me, as I mentioned, the birth of my daughter was imminent. And, I think those are always reflective moments where you kind of wonder and question what type of world you're bringing a child into. And, I hope that the statement that I co-authored with Christina Baldwin did the world justice, did this moment justice. I think, folks, if you haven't had a chance to read it, we will throw that statement in the chat. but we will also reintroduce it to you through the voices of young people from Middletown. This was a project that, like many things in 2020, came together very quickly within the last 48 hours. But I know in my portion of that statement that it was their voices and their spirits that rang, that it was their advocacy, their passion for a more just, more anti-racist community that spoke to me deeply. This is work that they've worked on with us here in Middletown for years. And I many ways saw their voices guiding at least my effort in this. And I think it speaks true to the part of the statement that speaks to youth leadership in this moment, that this isn't just adult work. This is community work, and this is youth leadership. And so with that, let us have the voices of young people bring in our statement.
My name is Neve, and I'll be reading the CYSA statement on anti-racism.
Hi, my name is Florimar Cáceres, and I will be reading the CYSA statement on anti-racism.
The Connecticut Youth Services Association promotes the well-being of Connecticut's children, youth, and families.
To that end, our children, our youth, and our communities are not well.
While in the throes of COVID-19 pandemic, our society has once again been reminded that we have failed those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
While the pandemic has magnified the inequities that have always existed, the light now shines even brighter on those systemic disparities. However, it is in the hour
of turbulence, unrest, and mass protests that the CYSA unequivocally stands against the destructive racism that has plagued our communities of color and our nation as a whole for far too long.
It is one thing to state that CYSA stands in opposition to systemic racism and white supremacy, but those words are empty without action. We as Connecticut's BIPOC youth need your accountability and your leadership. Our goal as a statewide association is to strengthen and support youth services bureaus in Connecticut.
Our support for youth is unwavering, and collectively, we must play our part in this anti-racism movement. To that end, we are committed to the following:
reimagining our youth justice system and diversion programs. Juvenile review boards are an unequally white SB-led institution, and we are beginning to move those spaces from retributive to restorative. The Black experience in America is one built on pain and trauma, and the spaces we hold should not add to that. We can and should be healers, and to that can happen when we separate pain and punishment from accountability. While all youth will benefit from the remodeling process, we know that BIPOC youth who have been historically marginalized and overrepresented in this justice system will benefit greatly by having their humanity centered in this way. 2.
we can and should be lined in the dismantling of school to prison pipeline. Our advocacy here is vital as it is programmatic support to ensure youth get support when they need it instead of having to find it in the justice system. We need to disrupt the thinking that sees young Black men as threats, that doesn't listen to the pain of Black girls, and also sees both groups as being older, more mature, and thus more in need of accountability and consequences than their peers of the same age. Again, while all youth will benefit from the discrimination of adolescents' behavior, it will make particular strides for BIPOC youth. 3.
We also have an obligation to promote youth-led social change. We cannot nor should not shield youth from issues of race. The creating of racial identifiers and constructs happen as early as 3 years old, so it is never too early to begin this work with them. Proactively teaching tolerance, inclusion, and allyship can profoundly mitigate the effects of racism and white supremacy as a socialized and ingrained mentality. This is true for both the youth themselves and the caring adults that work with young people. Youth leadership programs at any level should be given opportunities to discuss race and develop solutions. Furthermore, we ask you to actively seek out organizations in your community that are centering BIPOC youth and seek out what their needs are or what actions they are calling for. If you live in a community that does not have these organizations or many BIPOC community members, spend time with youth deconstructing why that is. 4. Our Professional Development Subcommittee is beginning the work of addressing the needs of our system around this issue. They plan on creating a series of workshops for the summer and fall focused on race as well as anti-racism toolkits for youth workers. This will work in parallel to CYSA's current commitment to trainings focused on youth justice reform via our JRBs. Finally, we recognize that this anti-racism work needs to also be personal, as we can't change these systems properly if we don't also commit to our own internal work.
For our BPOC colleagues, let us know how we can create these spaces of healing and support. This is a complicated movement in time, but once you have again shown us your brilliance in the face of unwarranting adversity. For our white colleagues, we challenge you to do better and to be better. This movement is littered with symbols and tokens of support that are quick and easy, but are at the end of the day meaningless. Let us seek depth over speed. Walk towards the path of developed racial consciousness, no matter how uncomfortable or anxious that may make you.
Just as we teach our children to listen, learn, and act again, if we begin our racial conditioning at the age of 3, this means we have decades of bias to unpack. These messages have been both overt and covert in dismission and absorption. Let us move past the notions of performative allyship and take on the work of truly being anti-racist, because much like other large issues of the day, if we simply behave in non-racist ways, we do nothing to dismantle the persuasive system.
We would like to encourage folks to use the scaffolder resources to assess where you may be in this journey and what some of your next steps in learning and growth may be. You can find these resources on the CYSA, the Connecticut Youth Services website. History will ask us where we stood in this defining moment. Let us be bold here. It can happen in many different ways, but please let those ways be bold. To quote Bellamy Schaffner, it is insufficient to tell your children that racists and racism are bad. It is insufficient to simply explain we love people of all colors. It is lazy and near damaging to proclaim a love for all people, but never make the leap of actually reaching out to people of color or adding tangible diversity to your life. In a world filled with empty rhetoric, our children don't need to hear words from us without action. They need to see us embody the beliefs we claim to hold dear.
Fantastic, wonderful, wonderful. So good morning, everyone. You've just heard an extremely powerful reading of CYSA's statement on anti-racism from these dynamic young people. So thank you so much for that, for giving that to us. As this is an extremely tumultuous time that we are facing, CYSA felt that it was vitally important that we move into this space with an honest assessment of where we are and developing a clear vision as to where we want to go. As we're struggling with confronting our original sin of racism, bigotry, and hatred, and as we work to build a better path for the youth that we're so honored to serve every day, I have the honor now, this morning, to introduce now speaker, Martha Brackeen-Harris. Martha Brackeen-Harris is a retired educator with over 40 years of extensive experience in working with students and adults in a variety of public schools, independent schools, and college settings. As a classroom teacher, administrator, and director of community outreach, her sphere of influence included children and families in city, town, suburb and rural communities. In addition to working directly with students of all ages, Martha has worked for school change as a member of several trustee boards and as a corporator in both school and community organizations. As a former director of the Beginning Teachers Institute, Martha's passion for mentoring new and experienced teachers was born. She has conducted numerous workshops for educators and parents at national conferences in public and independent schools. She is a founding member and served for 34 years as a trustee on the Sphere Consortium of Independent Schools, an organization that seeks to make Hartford area independent schools welcoming and safe communities for all employees and students. Her work through this organization and as a director of multicultural students, diversity director, and diversity consultant for various schools and organizations fed her love of diversity, equity, and social justice work. Over the past few years, she has conducted school and community conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice by using current books on these topics. Martha is the Sunday school teacher of the Union Baptist Church in Hartford, Connecticut, and is a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She is married to Donald F. Harris Jr., and they are the parents of 4 daughters and 1 son who is deceased. They also have 7 grandchildren. Martha holds a bachelor's degree from the Pennsylvania State University and both a master's and doctoral degree from the University of Hartford. I urge you now to engage through listening and to allow yourself to become absorbed in her story. Let it resonate with you and be a motivator for how we frame our collective work moving forward. Please join me in welcoming my very first teacher, my daily inspiration, and my mother, Dr. Martha Brackeen-Harris.
Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you, CYSA, and especially Mary, who just worked with me, and I've just grown to love her. I feel as though we're sisters through this work. I love having the opportunity to share my story at your annual conference. I want you to walk with me today as I reflect on my life's journey. I appreciate all of your work. I've just been mesmerized by the program so far. And when you hear my story, you'll understand why I appreciate associations and organizations and the work that you do. I want to begin by having you listen to some of the words of the poem that James Weldon Johnson wrote, which became the lyrics to the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. My story is in those words. Now, let's begin our journey. Next. I am a teacher. Therefore, I am a lifelong learner. Every single day, I learn something new. And whatever role I am in, wife, mother, grandmother, all of my roles, my passion for teaching enhances that role. I was influenced by both of my grandmothers. They were teachers. And also the story of Mary McLeod Bethune, the founder of Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, Florida. Though her road was extremely difficult, she persevered. She was a true educator of hope. She left us this legacy. I leave you love. I leave you hope. I leave the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you respect for the use of power. I leave you faith. I leave you racial dignity. That's a wonderful legacy. I kept this in every office or classroom that I had because I had to refer to it often. So thank you, Mary McLeod Bethune. Thank you, my grandmothers. Thank you for all of the people who brought me this far with hope. Next. I was born in Pittsburgh, PA in 1949. Because I was born in the North, my life was very different from the life of my parents as they were growing up. My father, a Baptist minister, was born in 1918 in Port Arthur, Texas, and my mother was born in 1926 in Xenia, Ohio. The Jim Crow laws, or the laws that enforce racial segregation in the South, but more indirectly in other states, were inescapable. My parents were routinely called the N-word, or son, or boy for my father, or wench, or girl for my mother, when they had to interact in mixed society. My parents, for many years, described themselves as colored or Negro. The story of my birth gives us a look at how the effects of segregation lingered and permeated through all of Black people's lives wherever they lived. Many of these effects remain today. I was the third child, and when my mother had all of the signs that I was on my way, she told my father that they should leave immediately because this child was in a hurry. So they got in the car, and my mother, in a panic, informed my father that they were not going to make it to the hospital, which was on the other side of the city, and where her doctor was waiting. So my dad made a quick U-turn, and they headed to the hospital that was nearer to their home, but was unofficially reserved for whites only. He drove to the emergency room of this hospital and told them that his wife needed to be admitted immediately. They suggested the Negro hospital, but when he told them her condition, they said, well, we'll deliver the baby in the car. That was not going to happen. My dad loved his green Buick Special, and I was not going to be born in there. Besides, once he left Texas, he vowed that he would never accept unjust treatment without a fight, and no one was going to treat his family unfairly. My dad, the Baptist minister, mind you, civil rights advocate and good friend of Dr. Martin Luther King, said he wasn't leaving, went to his car, lifted my mother, carried her into the hospital, and demanded that they take care of her. Their compromise was to deliver me in a bed in the emergency room. Luckily, my mom was allowed to remain in the hospital until we were released to go home. Of course, that started my dad. He began the fight for all hospitals to open their doors to anyone who needed help in Pittsburgh. My mother stayed at home with us while my father was tending to his church's needs and working to fight the challenges that the members of his congregation encountered in the city of Pittsburgh, the North. 2.5 years later, we welcomed our baby sister into the family. Now we were complete. Our parents worked very hard to let us know that they were proud of us just the way we were. I remember my dad saying, "Give me some of that brown skin sugar. when he wanted a hug or a kiss in his Texas accent. When we were dressed up, usually to go to church, he would tell us how beautiful we looked. They were deliberate in setting a strong foundation for us so that no matter what messages society would give us, we knew we were loved, capable, and everything about us was designed just for us. They knew what we would encounter, that we would be called names. Indeed, each one of us experienced being called the N-word, that people would stare at us and show their disdain of our existence. Although we were sheltered, we enjoyed our childhood in Pittsburgh. Still, we were taught the realities of our country, and they did everything in their power to prepare us for the inevitable. Next. Early years, early lessons, the train ride to Texas. We visited my maternal grandparents often because they lived in Ohio, but visiting my grandparents who had moved to from Port Arthur, Texas to Beaumont was a rare occurrence. My grandparents usually visited us, but occasionally my grandparents would take us back with them on the train so my parents could take a well-deserved vacation. With 4 children under 4, they needed it. My earliest memory of riding the train was exciting, but confusing. We boarded in Pittsburgh, the North, and were able to have a room with sleeping beds. We thought that was fabulous. We enjoyed the privacy because we had room to move around and could laugh and be noisy more than when we rode in a car. The confusing part was when we reached a certain point on the trip. The car stopped, the train stopped. Our grandparents said, "Gather your things." We had to carry them, leave the car, leave the train, and get on the same train, but a different part. Dr. Martin Luther King shared the same experience as he traveled to and from Connecticut to work in the tobacco fields during the summer. But my experience was the opposite. I was just visiting the South. He was going back to live. Everyone in the train car that we were in looked like us. We had to sit quietly and either read or color. We were warned not to disturb the other passengers because my grandparents were strict. When we were hungry, we couldn't go to the dining car like we did on the first part of the trip. My grandparents had brought the food that my mother packed for us before we left. Luckily, my grandparents had brought many things that would keep us busy. I don't know how long it took us to get to Texas, but we were certainly glad to stretch our legs when we arrived. Even though I didn't understand why our trip happened that way, I remembered how I felt. Next. The little red sandals. There are certain experiences in our early lives that help define our journey on this earth. This story is centered around these sandals. This is the modern version. Texas, and actually, I'm going to find a little girl in our, one of the programs in our church, and I'm going to give her my sandals. Texas was so hot, and I always complained that my feet hurt. One day, my grandfather told me to take off my shoes and stand on a piece of paper. He drew an outline of each foot, folded the paper up, put it in his pocket, and told me to put my shoes back on because we were going for a walk. I was thrilled. I felt very special that day because I rarely had time alone with my parents or grandparents. When we arrived in town, we entered a shoe store and my grandfather pulled the paper with the outline of my feet out of his pocket, I wondered what was going on. The salesperson took the paper, went into a back room, and brought out a box. It contained the most beautiful red sandals I had ever seen. I wanted to try them on right away, as all children do. But my grandfather said, no, you can't try them on in the store. But as soon as you get home, you can put them on. Well, I was afraid they wouldn't fit. And I was not sure I wanted to wait, but of course I had no choice. He told me that he was extra careful, and when he drew my feet, that was the size of the shoes, and he was very careful because he knew we couldn't take them back. So the great trip, I had to wait to wear my sandals. But when I finally got home and tried my sandals on, thank goodness they fit, and I was happy. What he didn't tell me was that most Negroes, that's what we were called then, wouldn't even come into the store, couldn't come into the store. They had to stand at the back entrance if they wanted to purchase shoes, pay for them, and wait for the store owner to come back to the store and hand it to them through the door. Why was my grandfather allowed in the store? Well, he was allowed in the store because he was the only Black doctor in the town, and there were only a few white doctors. So since his office was right in town near the stores, and someone might just need him in a dire emergency, it would be a dire emergency to have to go to a Black doctor. He could make his purchase. He was able to come into the store, and that meant that he would just be able to be the one special person. That story stayed in my mind for years. And 35 years later, my sister and I went to Beaumont to visit my ailing grandmother. You know what we did, right? We went to downtown Beaumont. We went in a shoe store. Of course, we didn't know whether that was the same one or not. But we decided we were going to try on as many shoes as we want. And we both ended up buying, each of us bought a pair of red shoes. And we walked around in them for the rest of our trip. Next. The bus ride. My grandmother, who besides being a teacher, was the secretary of the local NAACP, decided against my mother's protests that we should experience riding on a segregated bus. So she walked us to the bus stop and told us to wait quietly. And when the bus stopped, go to the side door and wait. When the bus arrived, she quickly walked up the steps and paid for our fare. Then she came down the steps quickly to where we were waiting and ushered us on the bus. She directed us to sit in the back. I remembered sitting there and seeing a sign that said colored. And that image sticks with me today. 2 years ago, I visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and saw what looked like to me the exact sign that I saw on the bus so many years ago in Texas. I finally understood why my grandmother insisted that we have that experience. She wanted to give us an accurate account of how life was during the days of Jim Crow, and didn't want us to get a secondhand story from a history book. It was time to leave Texas, and my parents, who after having a vacation, which most likely was attending a Baptist ministers conference, returned to Texas to take us on the long train ride back home. Our trip back home began on the segregated train car. And when we were able to move once again to the sleeping car, I remember being relieved and exuberant. As I reflect, could this be a similar feeling to that which my enslaved ancestors felt when they first experienced freedom? I had a brand new pair of little red sandals, but the knowledge I gained during that first trip to Texas helped me to understand how stormy the road was that some people traveled. Next. Back home. When we got back home, it was time for me to get ready to enter school for the first time. Our country was in turmoil because that was the year when the US Supreme Court, in the case of Brown versus Board of Education, decided that state laws establishing racial segregation in public schools were unconstitutional, even if the segregated schools were otherwise equal in quality. In that same school year, the children of baby boomers like me crowded the schools so that the seats were scarce and classes were large. Our nation was unprepared for that year's school opening. We certainly can relate to that. I walked with my brother and sister and a crowd of neighborhood friends to school that first day. Our school was integrated because we lived in a neighborhood with many ethnicities, so our school carried on business as usual. We were sheltered and didn't have to fight to attend our neighborhood school, so long as we stayed in the North, we thought. We never thought about our cousins across the nation who were still attending segregated schools because that was the way of life for them. Their parents knew that laws don't take effect immediately, sometimes for many, many years, sometimes never. This slide shows Linda Brown, excuse me, whose father wanted her to attend a school within walking distance to her home, instead of riding a bus to a segregated school further away. They won the lawsuit, but many school systems in the South were massively resistant to school integration, as well as integration anywhere. I think on some level, the social atmosphere when I began my education fed into my work as a teacher and administrator who worked to make our public and independent schools accessible to all students. Thurgood Marshall, future Supreme Court Justice and the court's first African-American justice, whom someday I would meet, successfully argued the case. Next. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. When I was 10 years old, we moved to Philadelphia. Although it was in the same state, it felt as though we were in a completely different world. I don't know whether it was because I was paying more attention to events that were happening in our city, but across the nation and how they affected me, or that I was getting older. But it felt as though my sheltered life had come to a sudden end. Our new church was in the heart of the inner city, and we were exposed to a realistic look at poverty. We moved to an integrated neighborhood in the West Mount Airy section of the city, where most of the dwellings were single-family homes and large stately apartment buildings. Most homeowners were older couples or were young with young children, but there were two girls close to our ages on our street. But this new neighborhood was so much quieter and, I must admit, less fun than what we were used to. Traveling from our home neighborhood to church on a weekly basis was a constant reminder that even in the city of brotherly love, there were glaring substandard housing developments, poor social services, and poverty all around. So many suffered from lack of basic physical needs, and they had no choice but to use the church as a place of refuge and of help. I had my first Black teacher for the first half of my 6th grade year in Philadelphia. I had my first school experience with prejudice in the second half of my 6th grade school year in Philadelphia. When the administration changed the school start date from a system where we could start school in September or January to where all children began in September, in order to make this work, teachers were reassigned. And in January, I had to say goodbye to my wonderful teacher who looked like me and understood me, to another teacher who looked similar to all of my other prior teachers. I remember the day in spring when I had my first humiliating classroom experience. We were beginning a study of Africa, and my teacher wrote the word Niger on the board. Then she asked us to raise our hands and pronounce that word. I wasn't going to do that. After much prodding, some students tried unsuccessfully, but she continued until Michelle, I still can see her face today, a white student, said the N-word. Of course, the word wasn't the N-word, it was a country in Africa. But only then did our teacher pronounce the word correctly for us. Out of all of the countries in Africa, why did she choose that one? I remember having that same feeling that I had when I couldn't try on my red sandals, when I couldn't ride in the front of the bus, when I couldn't stay in the comfortable train car, and when I watched the terrible things that were happening to people who looked like me on the TV screen. That teacher also asked me and my classmates who looked like me questions about our home life and made comments that made us feel insulted. We now have a word for that, microaggressions. We would talk among ourselves about how we felt and how we didn't like her, but we could never pinpoint why. Those incidents helped me to decide I would teach and fight to have classrooms where teachers were aware of their biases and were culturally competent. The next time I had a teacher who looked like me was while I was pursuing my master's degree in Connecticut. When we read about the importance of having teachers in a school who reflect the student population, based on my experience, I know that it is tremendously important. Even though my teachers, except for my 2nd grade teacher, and of course my 6th grade teacher, taught me well, were kind and supporting, I usually felt like the other. I never wanted to call attention to myself, so I didn't raise my hand. I didn't feel as though I really belonged in their classroom. I enjoyed learning. I felt safe at school, but I always felt that there was something missing next. Our road trip now through the South back to Texas. One day in the early months of 1962, my father came home with maps. We knew what that meant. We were off for an adventure. It was to be a car trip to Texas in the summer. The son of a teacher, my father always knew that he would give us a job, so we had to plan the trip. By now, we knew what life was like in the South. We were apprehensive. We witnessed the violence of what was happening to people who looked like us, who lived in the South. My dad showed us a little green book, but since my dad bought it from the NAACP, we called it the NAACP book. You might have read the story or seen the movie about the green book. When he explained that we would stay in places that were safe for us, my hopes for staying in the Holiday Inn, which was my dream, the nation's innkeeper, were dashed. especially when we found out that the rustic place that we were going to stay had natural air conditioning. It was a cabin in the woods. We laughed, but I didn't think it was so funny. I let go of my dream of staying in a place that looked like the places on TV. I figured they weren't for me. As we drove further and further in the South, I became more nervous, especially when it began to get dark. When we arrived in Tennessee, we drove to Lookout Mountain, where you could see 7 states at one time. If you remember Dr. King's dream speech, he talked about Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. And whenever I hear that speech, I think about our road trip to Texas. Since it was nearing evening, my dad said that we would stop for the night. Would this be the night I got to stay in a nice hotel? When we drove through the gates of a college, I was really confused. Next, we drove to a dormitory and were told to get our things out because we were staying the night. This was a historically Black college in Tennessee. And since there are 6 HBCUs now, I don't know where we stayed, but historically Black colleges have served our communities in so many different ways that we don't even know about. They opened their dormitories in the summer when students were not attending classes so that Black people would have another choice for lodging in the South. They helped the colleges which today still need funding, as well as helped Black people. When white people opened their doors to us to go to college, many Black people took advantage of having more college choices and could usually get a better financial aid package. But think about what that did to the finances of the historically Black colleges. I've walked many HBCU campuses, not with my red sandals necessarily, but I have walked them. Altogether, my daughters have attended 3 HBCUs, and my granddaughter is a current student at Hampton University. When I look at the statistics of how many successful people of color have attended these colleges, our new vice president-elect, for one, give a shout out, and how many low-income or first-generation students have a better chance of completing their education and earning a college degree at an HBCU rather than a comparable non-HBCU, I feel confident that their doors will stay open so every child will have an opportunity of getting a great college education. Next. A different Texas? Yes or no? Well, of course, we were excited to finally arrive in Texas. It's a long car ride from Philadelphia to Texas. My grandparents had pecan trees and we could sit under the trees and eat all that we wanted. By this time, we could see the changes in how people were reacting to unfair treatment. The lunch counter sit-ins had spread throughout the South, and those walls were being struck down. However, we were still not allowed to eat in restaurants that were not Black owned. We could buy food at white owned places, but had to take it somewhere else to eat. We could go to the movies, which was exciting, but we had to sit in the balcony. We could not sit with everyone else, and we couldn't buy food at the concession stand. But we had a remedy. We would sneak in our own popcorn. By then, we could ride in any seat on the bus, but the conditions of the buses in our grandparents' neighborhood were old and in disrepair. We can probably guess where the bright, shiny new buses were. We couldn't venture out of the city because the Ku Klux Klan was active and lynchings were commonplace. Jim Crow laws, though unlawful by now, were alive and well. What we couldn't figure out for ourselves, our grandparents, as they say today, schooled us. But we did have a good time that second trip. We made friends, had gatherings in the park, met relatives, and spent many hours listening to their personal stories and the stories of our ancestors. We left stronger and wiser, which was fortunate because we were about to be tested. Next. Birmingham, Alabama. We arrived in Birmingham on our trip back to Philadelphia. We didn't know what an impact this side trip would have on our lives, and we couldn't understand why my dad decided to stop there. We stayed not at the Holiday Inn, but we stayed at a motor inn that was really nice. It was called the Gaston Motor Inn in Birmingham, Alabama. It was a nice establishment owned by a Black man. It didn't have a swimming pool, which I really wanted, and it disappointed me, but it was clean. And guess what? The air conditioning was real. We didn't have to open the windows to get a breath of fresh air. The next day, we got up early, walked the streets of Birmingham. I saw a majestic hotel, the Titweiler, and was frustrated again because my dream to stay in a luxury hotel still felt so out of reach. Just a side story. About 10 years ago, I went back to Birmingham and we stayed at the Titweiler Hotel. There is justice in this world. But we visited a church on 16th Street. My father always took us to church wherever we went. And on Sundays, we had to sit through a service. But this 16th Street church was very, very significant. We looked around, as we walked around the town, we could see Jim Crow was still so alive and well. White only signs seemed to be everywhere, and we could feel a tension in the air. After our stay, we continued on our journey home. I didn't know how that trip was going to affect the rest of my life, because after we got home in 1963, that was just months after our Southern tour. If you think back, that was a tumultuous year. April 16th, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King began writing his letter from a Birmingham jail. What was he doing in jail? Well, Dr. King was arrested because he disobeyed an injunction prohibiting parading, boycotting, picketing, etc. While in jail, he wrote a compelling letter explaining why they couldn't wait and had to seek justice immediately. Ironically, 8 Alabama clergymen, men of the cloth, wrote a statement against King and his nonviolent tactics. Does that sound familiar? When I think of this past summer of protest, I really can see history repeating itself. May 11th, 1963, the bombing of the A.G. Gaston Motel in Birmingham, Alabama. That was the same hotel that we stayed in while in Birmingham. Bombing was used often during the Civil Rights era. August 28th, 1963, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where Congressman John Lewis and Dr. King spoke. My parents were marching. September 15th, 1963, bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, the same church we visited in Birmingham. 4 young girls were killed. That hit home. They were attending Sunday school. I attended Sunday school every Sunday. November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. These events happened on land that I walked. The impact on our family was enormous, simply enormous. Next. Back home, police brutality. We returned to Philadelphia to find a city in turmoil. We were living in the 60s in Philadelphia under police commissioner and later mayor Frank Rizzo. Police brutality was the order of the day. Another side note, Frank Rizzo's statue was torn down in June 2020 after protesters of police brutality vandalized it. Police brutality was personal for us because many of the young men in our church were victims. I attended my first prayer vigil when a young minister in our church was brutally beaten by a policeman. Unfortunately, he wasn't the last. I want to call out their names because except for their families, their stories will be lost. Then I will call out the names of some of our recent victims. I include this tribute because many people don't understand the history of police brutality. It was as real in the 60s as it is today. 20th century victims, Matthew Haskell, Charles Best, Douglas Stokes, Ronald Ellerby, Walter Henry. 21st century, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. In 1963, I entered my high school years excited. And even with that new experience that I had during my visits to my grandparents' house, those memories were etched in my brain as I started learning more. I thought I could be shielded from the true reality of all those events that I was reading about because I could hide under the privilege of living in a middle-class neighborhood miles from the inner city. However, I soon found out that that phrase that Martin Luther King wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," was prophetic. One Saturday morning, not long after the events of 1963, my sister and I were fixing breakfast when the phone rang. The man on the other side of the phone line asked to speak to our father. When my sister responded, "No, he's not here," he asked her to tell her father that a bomb was going to go off at our house at midnight. I was assigned to write down messages, so I wrote just what she said when she repeated the words to him. And then we sat down to eat. All of a sudden, we looked at each other in disbelief. We both started talking about the 4 little girls who were killed in Birmingham and the bombing of the Gaston Hotel. Our father and his family were targeted because he was a public defender of equal rights. For months, we had to have 24 security at our house. Now, at first, it didn't dawn on us when we heard that message. And maybe we would have said, it's a crank call. But having actually walked through the experiences and the places where this was a reality, we knew we had to take it seriously, and we lived afraid. Martin Luther King went on to say, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." I want to change that last line and say, it affects some of us directly. These words are so true. We can't be passive because we don't experience injustice in our daily lives. You understand this. I'm preaching to the choir. And until we have widespread systemic change, we must keep working, keep doing your work. Next. My teen years. A new generation, activism, youth, new ways to fight for justice. Just like today, our youth pushed change more boldly than we ever did and started a new movement. When I entered college in 1967, I was an Afro-American and was in the midst of student activism. Shortly after James Brown's hit song, "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," was released in 1968, I identified as Black and proud. We sang James Brown's song boldly at the top of our lungs. We started wearing our hair in afros. Yes, I did manage one. We dressed in dashikis made from African cloth to claim and celebrate our identity, hoping against hope that who we were and what we wanted to become mattered. We boycotted companies that had policies that kept us from being employed and from earning a livable wage. We also planned sit-ins in colleges, demanding multicultural books, magazines, and a closer look at inclusion in the curriculum. We were going to change the world. When I see the energy and dedication that our youth have today, I see great potential that they will make changes. I see different generations of people working together to march, protest, plan, take action, and stand up to justice. One of the verses in the song, "We Shall Overcome," says, "We are not afraid." This is just as telling, if not more so, of our youth today. They are not afraid. I have not spoken much about allyship, but our white allies were with us in the 60s and in the 50s, but they're much more visible today than they were then. Let's keep that alliance going. Also, generation and generation were marching together. I felt my parents were afraid. My mom didn't want me to protest. They gave us flack, but we had to counter that because our parents knew what danger we could be in. But today we're all together. Next. For many years, especially in the workplace, Black people were referred to as minorities. Many felt that this term had more of a connotation than just referring to numbers. They felt less than could mean not as capable or not as good as others. However, when the minority classification included all women, we identified more with the term African American, so our rights wouldn't be lost or ignored in the fight for women's rights. I secured a teaching job immediately after college in Philadelphia. We had a strong teachers union, so we did have a voice in addressing issues of human rights in the workplace. However, archaic notions such as mandatory leave for all women in the 3rd month of their pregnancy had to be addressed. There were strict dress codes for teachers, no pants, traditional hairstyles, and other regulations that were unfair. Change was inevitable. This was a time of protest on a wide scale. Women's rights, the glass ceiling, social issues for all, economic issues, equal pay for equal work, war protests, abortion rights. These issues received more and more attention. Meanwhile, our country was questioning things that were happening in the Black community. The groundwork was being set for an infiltration of drugs in the African American communities, and incarceration was becoming dangerously widespread among African American males especially. I just heard one of the receivers of the award talking about the school to prison pipeline. That also comes off of this. We need to make more of an effort to build a strong community for our families, especially our youth, so their daily lives will be impacted by hope, not despair. Next. I began teaching in an inner city middle school in Philadelphia. My first class had just 46 students in 3 different grades, in 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Over 90% of my students were African American, and a large percentage of them lived in poverty. I dealt with the results of poverty on a daily basis. It was obvious that segregating Blacks and whites in separate neighborhoods would be one way to get over Brown versus Board of Education and make sure our schools were not too integrated. Keep wages for Blacks low and refuse to sell to Black families. Our schools suffered, our students suffered. The lasting effects are their reality. The fight continues. It was a wonderful experience for me. I will always remember that first class. They taught me the meaning of the word resilience. Quite unexpectedly, I had to leave my beloved Philadelphia to move to Connecticut because my husband was accepted to UConn Law School, which had recently expanded its doors to admit more Black applicants. Of course, as many things happened in my life, this coincided with the impending birth of our first child. So we took a trip to Connecticut to look for an apartment. I was really in the North now, I thought. No problems. I saw a great 3-family home in West Hartford with an apartment for rent sign in the front. When a woman came to the door, she looked at me, and I had that feeling that comes over me whenever I sense that this isn't going to go well. When I told her I was interested in renting the apartment, she looked me in the eye and said she didn't have an apartment to rent. I asked her why there was a sign in the front of the house, and her response was, people come, people go, so I just keep a sign up. I thanked her, got in my car, and continued my search. We found a great apartment in Hartford, and I once again had to come to grips with about the fact that the color of my skin would always play a factor in how I was treated. I remained in Philadelphia and taught until our child was born. My principal allowed me to stay, even though the current pregnancy policy said I had to leave, and then joined me. And then my daughter and I went to Connecticut to join my husband. That fall, I was hired to teach science in Bloomfield Public Schools. The school was integrated. There was adequate funding for books and supplies. I had no sets of books for my students in Philadelphia. After teaching in Bloomfield, I accepted a job to be the multicultural advisor at Miss Porter's School in Farmington. And there my formal diversity work began. I developed a course on African American history. Finally, in 2019, Connecticut passed a bill to include African American, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies in our curriculum. I wrote that course in 1975. How many years later? We're just getting around to passing a bill. After MPS, I accepted an offer to teach at Renbrook School, where I created a position of multicultural director, in addition to teaching full-time, mind you, and was a founding member of Sphere, as you heard. No matter what my formal job in education, I always worked to make sure our educational institutions were healthy places where all students could thrive. That is my calling. Next. Hope for the future, 50 years later. Now, I was a person of color. Together, when we look at my walk, how do we still have hope? When we see what is happening today, how can we believe that things will really change significantly? The first picture is that of the 1963 March on Washington, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous speech that said so much more than just about his dream. And my parents were somewhere in that crowd. They celebrated each small step. They both worked tirelessly until they died. I've continued their journey. 50 years after their walk, my daughter Carol and I walked at the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, joined by my brother and a surprise visit from one of my former students who said his dream was to experience this walk with me. That's one of the great benefits of being an educator. We talked about how proud our parents would have been to know that we had opportunities that they fought for, but never saw. As we watched, we thought about the many doors that had been opened to us and knew that we weren't marching for ourselves. We were marching for them. Next. Work for the change you wish to see. The picture on the left shows my father. He's the man in the dark suit in 1955, encouraging people to vote. He went from neighborhood to neighborhood. When my father was born, his mother didn't have the right to vote, which is amazing when you think about it. And so voting rights has always been a passion for him. On the right is a picture of his great-grandchildren. In 2020, a few weeks ago, supporting, not even that long, supporting his granddaughter, Christina Baldwin, as she voted. Imagine how the election of 2008 and 2012 smoothed the journey for his great-grandson, and the election of 2020 will clear the path for his granddaughter. So when you do the work, no matter how long it takes, your wish will come true. Next. The future is now. Could I ask that the slideshow stop so you just have me? Thank you. The future is now. How is it the same? How is it different? When I think about the people I have met, Dr. Martin Luther King, and I embarrass myself in front of him, but that's another story. Coretta Scott King, Thurgood Marshall, John Lewis, Maya Angelou, and people I have never met in person, but know through their stories or being in their audience. Mary McLeod Bethune, Dorothy Height, Eleanor Roosevelt, Toni Morrison. I think about the road they traveled and how they cleared so many of the big boulders out of my way. Your charge as you work with our youth, as you make decisions, as you make sure that they have all of the services and help they need, continue on a collective and personal level to move the boulders, the rocks, the stones, and even the small pebbles, no matter how small they are, out of their way, so that no matter what shoes they are wearing, Jordans, Crocs, Nikes, Uggs, or little red sandals, you will have made a smoother road for youth who can make more of a significant difference in their lives than you can imagine. Continued blessings for all of you. Thank you for listening to her story.
I think normally we'd have a room filled with applause. We don't have that right now, but I think it's important to have a moment of reflective silence. To that applause might kind of drown out. This story, your story, is both heartbreaking and heartwarming. And I think emblematic of the multitude of realities in the American experience. And that folks don't always take the time or have the opportunity to understand and learn. And the trauma and pain that are born out of that, but the brilliance and joy that come with that resilience shine through. And I speak so deeply to the work we need to do, right? Because this is, well, Martha, you've been with us for a while. This is still in our recent history. This is not that long ago. And the shadows of those moments in this era still loom large. We do not live in a post-racial society, right? This did not end in the 60s. We know that. And while we're glad that some aspects are better, many aspects have stayed the same. And so we're so appreciative of this moment, of your story, of your optimism, the use of your role as an educator to teach us this morning is present. And I thank you for that. We thank you for that. Absolutely. And so this is a good moment for a break on two fronts. One, because we've been in our seats for a while, but again, two, to have this opportunity to reflect on the stories that we just heard, and the optimism and the action that must follow. And that will pivot to the next part of our conversation. So Martha, please, thank you so much. Christina, thank you for sharing your mother with us. Martha, thank you for sharing your daughter with us. We will we'll restart in 5 minutes. If we can keep to a 5-minute break, that would be appreciative, and we'll go from there. So if it's 11 on the dot now, we'll start at, let's say, 11:06. So thank you all.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you have taken a few moments to stretch and can find your way back to your desk or wherever you're viewing us today. We thank you for staying on with us. We have another wonderful speaker that I have the honor of introducing. As an educator for over 20 years, Ingrid Kennedy currently serves as Executive Director of the State Education Resource Center. Ingrid migrated to the United States from Costa Rica in 1989 and became a U.S. citizen in 1990. Her educational career began as a Head Start educator in the city of Waterbury, and she graduated from Northwestern Connecticut Community College with an associate's degree in early childhood. She earned her bachelor's, master's, and sixth-year educational leadership degrees from Central Connecticut State University. In 2003, Ingrid joined SERC as a member of the consulting team, becoming an active contributor on SERC's intentional and strategic journey to examine the hidden realities of institutionalized racism and its impact in today's classrooms. Unmasking these biases has become an essential priority of Ingrid's transformational leadership approach. As a committed and passionate learner, Ingrid continues to gain new skills that enhance her role as a transformational leader and a positive agitator to create a sense of urgency for providing equitable and accessible education for all of our students. CYSA is pleased to partner with SERC staff and honored to have Ingrid speak with us all and mark today as an official start to an amazing journey of Connecticut's YSBs making and inspiring change going forward. So thank you so much, Ingrid.
Thank you so much. Whew. Tressa, thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. One thing that in the bio that Tressa just read for all of you did not say, it is that Ingrid Kennedy is an emotional mess. Ingrid Kennedy always cries. Ingrid Kennedy is all over the map right now. So I am coming to all of you with that perspective in mind. So please, I hope that you understand that right now, I am incredibly emotional for what has been shared. And you see, here I am, just sharing with you myself. And I just want to thank you. Thank you to the Connecticut Youth Services Association for this amazing opportunity. I wanted to thank you for just giving me the honor to follow on the footsteps of an amazing woman that just shared her story in such a way that it has moved my soul. As a woman of color, seeing what I'm about to share with all of you, live by her and her family, it is just putting me in a place of, we have to do this. We have to do this. And I know that we can do it together. So I have prepared some remarks, and I know that my time is short and my tears are flowing. But this is what you get. This is Ingrid Kennedy, Executive Director of SERC. I am not going to apologize for the tears, and I'm going to say, I'm going to center myself right now so that I can make it through what I have prepared for all of you today. So I'm going to share the honor of SERC to be part of your meeting today. 48 years that you are celebrating. So let me tell you that I have taken the words from this presentation right out from your statement. You say accountability and leadership. It is about commitment, it's about healing, restoration, and change. So let me give you the world. Let me do a transfer of power. Let me bring into the space the urgency of the now. Our children deserve of us the commitment. When I heard Dr. Brackeen-Harris, hope, it has placed me in this moment right now because she shared her story. What you have before you is two maps of the United States, one that is over 300 years old and the other one that is the now. I want you to pay attention to the line between, to the division between those two maps. Dr. Brackeen-Harris said something about the other. The other. That division between those maps, I'm going to call it, something happened over 400 years ago and today that created the other. And we heard it through her story. I'm going to call that division the achievement gap, the gender gap, the racialized gap, the opportunity gap, the fiscal gap, the health gap. Every single one of those things that has separated us, that made her travels back and forward, those moments in her history, different, poignant. That's the other. And we today, right here, say, then, now. Why is it that we continue to experience these things? As the executive director of the State Education Research Center over 20 years ago, we said we needed to say why. Why is it that this pain exists in our communities, in our countries? Why is it? And we've been seeking the answer for years. And I read the answer in your statement. I read it in your statement. You said, commitment, action, we need to do it together. So that's what I'm here. I am here because then and now, and there is a future. There is a future because over 400 years, our communities of color have been saying we can't breed. Let us breed. Let us share on the same air. Let us share on the same space. Now is the moment that we hold on to each other and say, let's do this together. May 25th, 2020, we witnessed the pain. We witnessed 400 years of power and privilege choking the life of a human being. 400 years we enslaved humans. And before our eyes, our children witness it. And we can rewind it. We can play it over and over again and see a man gasping for air and calling his mother. We can do it. We can change it. We can do it because we did not create this. Debbie Irvin says, we did not create this. But then she goes and said, each one of us has the power to undo it. The statement, the collective statement that you put out about anti-racism, it says we can do it because there is a loophole, as Debbie Irvin says. We were not born racist. Racism is taught and racism is learned. And understanding how and why our beliefs develop along racial lines holds the promise of healing. freedom and liberation to unleash our human potential. We have it. And what you do for our youth, our children, what you do for them. So why am I here before you crying? I can't even see through my glasses anymore. Why am I here? Because you said it. You said it is one thing to state that CYSA stands in opposition to systemic racism and white supremacy, but those words are empty without action. I am here because you said there is action. When I heard Dr. Brackeen-Harris talk about Dr. King and the experience of her family being right there, 1960s, right then he said, we are confronted with the urgency of the now. This moment right now might well be mankind's chance to choose between chaos and community. And here we are, 2020. Here we are again at this critical time in our history. And I said to you, thank you. Thank you to your organization, thank you to every single one of you, because you have chosen community. It is only through community that we can do this together. So we need to stay vigilant. We witness right now, we can see our country is divided. I'm not going to get political, but we can see it. The division exists. It is divided. So we need to be vigilant. So I'm going to give you some numbers, and I need you to keep this in mind for a second. I'm going to give you these numbers, 4 numbers: 74.1 million, 772,790, 325, and number 4 is 1. I will come back to these numbers before I end my remarks. So in order for your statement to come together, and we heard the reading of the youth, it was powerful. We need to acknowledge that systemic racism exists. A structural racism, those public policies and institutional practices that interact to perpetuate power and privilege, they exist. We heard it through the story. They are there. Your statement making clear. We know there is division. We know there is difference. Do know that there is structural practice that perpetuate injustice. We know it. Your statements say anti-racism. It is that conscious and deliberate in your individual and collective action that challenges the impact and perpetuation of institutionalized white racial power, position, and privilege. You have made a strong statement. So that's why I'm here. So I'm going to play a short video for you. I need you to take a look at this video. I need you to, as we continue to reflect on the power of the narrative before us, I need you to reflect. power of the look. How are we seeing our children, our future? Our Black and brown communities for years have called out to say, we have the power to become. We have the power to be. But the reality for many of our Black and brown communities, no matter how many degrees we might hold, there is this thing that is always over. So how do we change it for our children? We need to critically interrogate everything that comes before us. We need to question it. We need to ask her, how is this impacting? So the critical interruption is that intentional and notable action that is going to force us to purposely pay attention to perspectives others than our own. I would like to say that George Floyd was a critical interruption. He critically came before us. That event is that we need to stop and realize that the pain exists, is there, and we need to do something about it. So we're going to critically interrogate what is before us so that we want to make sure that our actions moving forward represent how we see anti-racism and social justice. When I read your statement, Connecticut Youth Services Association, it moved me. It moved me. And I said, you are ready for action. And the State Education Research Center is honored to join you. And it was said over and over today, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Undoing 400 years of injustice, oppression, disparities, looking at our philosophies, policies. How do we do it? We do it together. So the State Education Resource Center is honored and humble to join you, because we need to recognize that white privilege exists, is there. We need to talk about it. And as I was paying attention to the chat, we need to be racially conscious and aware that it happens. It is there. That sometimes unconsciously or consciously, we use it and take advantage. So we need to interrupt it. We need to stop it. As I mentioned, the State Education Research Center is just humbled to be part of this journey. And I am here to share with all of you that when I had the opportunity to meet your Professional Development Committee, when I had the pleasure to meet your president, Justin, when they were seeking for an organization that could provide this level of support, what is going to happen next? They support your organization and being able to really bring into action that a powerful statement. That meeting, that interview was one of the most powerful and challenging professional interviews I have never been on. And I'm sharing this with all of you because your leadership team, your professional development team, commitment to make sure that this statement comes to life, the level of leadership and commitment to make that happen. When I turned off my Zoom that day, I was almost shaking, like, whoa, yes. The questions that were asked, not only about self, but about the organization. So we have gone through this journey ourselves, CERC, for over 20 years, and we're still learning. And we know that we have made mistakes as an organization, but every time we get up and say, we have to do it. So I'm here to tell you, as we enter into this journey, as you enter this journey, and as you moving forward as an organization through the multiple ways in which the commitment has been made to provide professional development, to build capacity, and to provide sustainability, the levels of support that you're receiving from your organization is one that I have not seen too often. So I'm just honored and just proud for CERC to be part of it. So there's a choice, and this is the individual part of it. There is a choice that we can make. I want you to think about yours.
With inverted tongue, from whence does fulfillment come? When I expel from this mortal shell, we're at death the living now. Though you someone I can't see, cry to me, and I do.
So why am I here? It is one thing to state the CYS stands in opposition to systemic racism and white supremacy, but those words are empty without action. We all have a choice. Remember, racism is taught. We were not born racist. Let's go back to the numbers. 74.1 million, the number of youth under the age of 18 in the United States of America. 772,790 number of youth under the age of 18 in Connecticut. 325, the number of participants that's scheduled for this session today. And number one, that's you. I call this action by numbers. You, one, have the power to impact 74.1 million. These are our youth in the United States. You, one, have the power to impact 772,000. As those of us who registered for this session today have the power to impact. I thank you for your commitment. I thank you for your leadership. And the State Education Resource Center is just honored to be part of this journey with all of you. I know my time is running out, but I wanted to tell you that there was something else in your statement that they said, we must be bold. Because in the future, our children are going to ask, what have you done? What did you do? What did we do in 2020? In that moment that we all witnessed, what did we do? We as adults now have in our hands the way to shape the future for our youth. I thank you. I thank you, and I thank you. And I think I've given it to you, Justin, and I hope I did what I was supposed to do. My apologies for my tears, but I am so emotional right now, so thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will stop sharing now.
Ingrid, thank you. Again, naturally, we would be in a room of applause right now. But let us continue to use the silence to be reflective. And we know that this work is both powerful and painful. That it is both emotional and callous. And we need to operate, in those quadrants, and support each other as we ebb and flow within them. And so, Ingrid, thank you. We know for many this work is as much as heart work as it is head work, and that was clear through your talk. And I think an important follow-up to a story embedded in racism is to understand how this lives at the societal level, at the structural level, at the systems level, and why the term being anti-racist is such an important one to adopt. Because while we can make personal and individual commitments to this work, nothing changes. While we can be kind to one another on individual levels, if we don't address our programs, if we don't address our policies, if we don't address our structures and our systems, nothing changes. And so we know, whether it's juvenile justice, whether it's juvenile review boards, and I would encourage all of us to stop using the word juvenile, because we know juvenile has no connotations of positive work. Our words are going to matter going forward. Our words have always mattered, but our words matter going forward. And so taking those deep, hard looks at the processes and programs and policies that we own, and to your point, Ingrid, that critical examination at every level is going to be important. And folks know that the commitment is here at the leadership level to do that with you. So thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you.
I think a little bit about this picture behind me. It's on my wall for a reason. It is intentional. This notion of pop art, the notion that anything can be art, that anything can be beautiful, is a powerful symbol to me. That a soup can can be art. And if a soup can be art, then we know that anything can be beautiful. That each and every one of our children is beautiful. And we know they don't all feel that way. And we have to own that. We have to embrace that. We have to change that. That is our work. That is our collective work. I believe that deeply. I know I share that with you. And we can do it. I know we can. I know we can. So as we sit with this, both the joy and the pain, let me just offer a note of thank you again to the Professional Development Committee. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Cephas. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Tresha. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, John. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Allison. This didn't happen by accident. To Martha and Ingrid, in front of the scenes, thank you for your stories and your passion. It resonated with each and every one of us. Thank you, Lori. Excuse me. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your commitment to this work for decades, for a lifetime. Greg, thank you for being behind the scenes and making this run as smoothly as it did. It's no small task, and it took a lot of pressure off of folks on this end to make that work well. In a matter of personal privilege, thank you to Bonnie and Katie, my staff here in Middletown, for holding me up through this moment. I hope I do you justice every day. This is hard, but this is important. And you will all be receiving evaluations. We look forward towards your feedback. This was really important. In that evaluation, there will also be information around subscribing to the some of the anti-racism work that we'll be doing moving forward, as well as other subcommittees within the Connecticut Youth Services Association. But please take a moment to fill that out. We'll also follow up with all relevant materials that we can. So as we move forward today, as Ingrid mentioned, let's just borrow the final words of that statement and be bold. I don't care how that is or what that is. Just be bold. Do the work. I'll do it with you. I promise. But be bold. Thank you all. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. Let's get through this thing so we can continue building communities as we move forward. Thank you so much. It's a debt of gratitude. Thank you.